Hey there, sleuths. Welcome to the Detective's Den, your one-stop spot for unpacking mysteries, cracking cases, and diving deep into the unknown. I'm your name, and I'll be your guide on this investigative journey. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Now tell me, from which corner of the globe are you tuning in today? Drop your location in the comments below. Let's see just how far our detective network reaches. Chapter 1, A Gathering by the Sea. Hercule Poirot's little black hansom cab clattered up the narrow lane leading to Windermere House, its heavy wheels shuddering as they traversed the pebbled drive. A low, grey sky loomed overhead, and salt-laden gusts from the Cornish sea whipped through the air, carrying a chill that spoke of remote headlands and lonely lighthouses. Poirot tipped his tall black hat to the heavy oaken door, a handsome entrance rimmed with iron studs, and rang the bell with deliberate calm. One might have been forgiven for assuming him composed, yet beneath that immaculate tweed overcoat and below those famously waxed moustaches, his little grey cells were already at work, ticking and whirring as only they could. Behind the door stood Miss Lydia Mayhew, the housekeeper, a woman of slender frame and severe bun, her neat cap perched atop hair as white as the bloom of sea foam. In her sharp navy uniform she looked every inch the efficient governess, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot," she announced with deference, stepping aside. "We are honored that you accepted Lady Philimore's invitation." "Madame's hospitality is indeed most gracious," Poirot replied, his voice a gentle baritone. He allowed his fingers to caress the gloved hand which assisted him from the cab. The housekeeper's expression remained impassive, but Poirot had already observed her well-trimmed nails and the faint whiff of lavender on her sleeve, details, perhaps, that would come to matter. With a subtle nod, he passed through the threshold into the great hall. Windermere House was a study in contrasts, its walls, panelled with dark oak and carved with intricate Celtic knots, lent an austere gravitas, while high windows afforded wide views over windswept moors and the spindrift-dappled surf. A grand staircase spiraled to the upper floors like the tendrils of a sea nautilus, its bands of wrought iron handrail gleaming under wrought brass sconces. At the foot of the stairs, a roaring fire crackled in a vast stone hearth, sending flickering shadows dancing upon Persian rugs and velvet settees. Poirot paused to remove his gloves, then surveyed the company assembled before him. At the tufted green leather sofas sat 4 figures, each absorbed in their own private reverie. He distinguished them in turn. First, Miss Eleanor Chase, the budding novelist. She was slender and poised, her chestnut hair pulled back in an austere chignon. Her grey-green eyes were sharp, observant, almost hawk-like, and they flicked to Poirot with wary interest as she smoothed the front of her simple navy dress. There was an ink stain marred upon the cuff of her left sleeve, as though she had been writing in haste only moments before. To her right reclined Mr. Sebastian Grier, a poet of some modest renown. He looked every inch the romantic artiste, his dark hair grown a trifle long and tousled. A pair of thin spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose, and his fingers traced idle patterns upon a well-thumbed volume of sonnets. His half-smile suggested a man accustomed to drama, though his posture was slumped, a fatigue, or perhaps a calculated air of nonchalance. Opposite them stood Monsieur Lucien Dupré, an art dealer of Parisian extraction. His black waistcoat fit him like a glove, and at his lapel glittered a slender silver tie clip. He carried himself with the easy assurance of a man who had negotiated many a fine sale. His dark eyes, however, bore a trace of unease as they roved over the tall windows, as though he expected someone, or something, to burst through at any moment. Finally, Admiral Sir Leonard Ravenshaw, retired. A solid, statuesque figure, his broad shoulders strained the limits of his naval jacket. His steel-grey hair was cropped close, and his posture was ramrod straight, betraying decades of life at sea. In his left hand he held a polished ebony cane topped with a brass lion's head, on his right wrist gleamed a gold naval watch. Something in his posture suggested the weight of former command, and yet his pale blue eyes were distant, as though haunted by memories of storms and battles long ago. Poirot inclined his head in greeting. "Miss Amis," he said, his articulation crisp and precise, it is my honor to join you all at Windermere House for Lady Phillimore's writer's winter residency. I trust your journeys hither were comfortable." Miss Chase inclined her head but made no reply. Mr. Greer's voice, when it came, was silky yet slightly strained. "Comfortable enough, thank you, Inspector." Poirot allowed the slip. The guests did not yet know he would not take offense, for he cared little for titles so long as his little grey cells could work unimpeded. Miss Mayhew intervened with the grace of a seasoned hostess. "Tea will be served in the drawing-room shortly," she announced. "Shall I show you the way, Monsieur Poirot?" He accepted, following her along a corridor rich with family portraits, each face carved in stern oil and gold leaf. At the corridor's end, a set of heavy crimson curtains parted to reveal a cozy room warmed by a substantial fire. Overhead, the ceiling was painted with cherubs drifting among clouds, a whimsical contrast to the sea-tossed moors below. As the butler, Mr. Collins, placed a silver tray before him, Poirot took note of the contents: delicate bone china cups, a pot of Lady Grey tea, and an assortment of finger sandwiches and warm scones, strawberry jam and clotted cream on the side. He poured a measure of tea into his cup, no sugar, and inhaled the fragrant bergamot. He always began with tea. It settled his mind and sharpened his senses. The door opened once more, admitting the final guest, Lady Phillimore herself. Tall and statuesque, she carried the bearing of an aristocrat, her auburn hair swept into an intricate chignon festooned with pearls. She wore a tailored emerald green gown that complemented her pale complexion, and her deep-set blue eyes surveyed her guests with a mixture of pride and restrained excitement. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," she intoned, her voice smooth and cultured. "I am delighted you could join us. We are all eager for your company and expertise." She inclined her head toward the assembled authors. "Over the next fortnight, I trust there will be much collaboration, inspiration, and, if the fates allow, delightful discourse on the nature of artistic creation." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, I am humbled. I shall do my utmost to contribute." Lady Phillimore's smile was radiant. She waved toward a low chaise near the hearth. "Shall we begin, then? Tea is but the prelude. Afterward, a recital of passages from your works, if you please." No sooner had she concluded when the storm outside intensified. Thunder rumbled over the waves, and rain spattered against the tall windows with gusty insistence. The lights dimmed momentarily, the house's electricity yielding to the gale, and a collective hush descended. Poirot's keen ears registered the slight hum of the generator sputtering back to life, and the soft scuff of boots on carpet beyond the curtains. "Ah, a dram of atmosphere," Mr. Greer quipped, rubbing his hands. Yet even he sounded uneasy. Miss Chase crossed her legs with quiet finesse, the rip of her dress brushing the carpet. Monsieur Dupré leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Admiral Ravenshaw's jaw clenched. All of them were actors now upon a stage set by the raw drama of the Cornish coast. Poirot, sipping his tea, allowed a faint smile to flicker across his moustaches. The storm was welcome. It would encase them here, sharpen tensions, and reveal human character in its most elemental form. He had come expecting a comfortable retreat, a cozy gathering of literary spirits in a grand house by the sea. Instead, he found a collision of ambitions, rivalries, and secrets, all concealed beneath polite smiles and genteel façades. By the time tea concluded and Lady Phillimore rose to lead the group toward the drawing-room's broad bay window, Poirot's mind was already at work. He catalogued each face, each gesture, each minute alteration in posture. The wind howled anew as they peered out upon the churning Atlantic, and Poirot's small, bright eyes reflected both the lightning's flash and the promise of mystery ahead. In that moment, the stage was set. No one yet knew what spectre of misfortune lurked within these walls, perhaps jealousy, perhaps avarice, perhaps something more subtle and sinister. But Poirot knew one thing beyond question: before long, this grand house by the sea would witness a crime most ingenious. And when it did, he would be ready. His little grey cells would stir into action, illuminating every shadow, exposing every deceit, and untangling the web that threatened to ensnare them all. Thus began the winter residency at Windermere House, a gathering that promised creativity and camaraderie, yet would soon become the theatre of a chilling enigma. And foremost among the assembled was one man whose keen intellect and singular methodology would prove decisive when the hour of reckoning arrived, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2, The Unsettling Discovery. Dawn broke over Windermere House with a shy, rose-tinted light, as though the east sought to announce itself with gentle courtesy rather than abruptness. Through the tall, narrow windows of the library, slanted beams fell upon shelves of leather-bound volumes and the burnished brass of oil lamps. Yet the serene façade of morning concealed a tragedy. Lady Phillimore lay motionless upon the oriental carpet, her fine features now cold, her eyelids closed as though in the deepest sleep. It was Mr. Sebastian Grier, the poet, who made the grisly discovery. He had risen early to fetch a volume of Keats for inspiration, but paused at the doorway, transfixed. Lady Phillimore's body was stretched supine, arms resting at her sides, a single white rose placed with chilling deliberation upon her breast. The petals gleamed pure against the dark wool of her travelling cloak. No pool of blood spread beneath her, instead, only a tiny, precise puncture mark at the base of her slender throat, almost invisible unless one knelt close. "By Jove," Grier gasped, stepping back with trembling hands. The book he held, a slim volume of sonnets, slipped to the floor, its pages splaying like mournful fletching from an arrow. He pressed a hand to his lips, eyes wide and unblinking. A fresh cup of tea sat on the small writing table to Lady Phillimore's right, the liquid half poured, steam already dissipating into the chill air. The porcelain cup wavered on its saucer, as though disturbed only moments ago, its handle bearing no fingerprint but for Lady Phillimore's own delicate grip. Instinctively, Grier backed away and fired a trembling glance toward the central bay window. The curtains were drawn but not tightly, a slender cord of light curved across the floor, slicing through the gloom. Beyond, the sea heaved with invisible energy, its moans carried faintly upon the breeze. Grier's breath came in quick, uneven gasps. "Someone, call." "Mr. Collins," he whispered, voice cracking. Moments later, the library door swung open to admit the butler. Mr. Collins was grave, his prim countenance dimmed by sorrow. He raised a single finger to his lips upon seeing the fallen lady. Be calm, Sebastian." His voice, trained and controlled, belied the tremor in his eyes. "I will fetch Monsieur Poirot at once." Without another word, he retreated swiftly to the corridor. Grier sank onto a leather chair, his shoulders shaking. He brushed trembling fingers through his tousled hair, eyes never leaving Lady Phillimore's still form. He dared not speak further, lest the weight of reality crush him utterly. Within 5 minutes, Poirot arrived, brisk and solemn. The housekeeper, Miss Lydia Mayhew, met him at the threshold of the library, her usual composure strained to near breaking. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, voice hushed, it is Lady Phillimore." She nodded toward the carpet. She's dead." Poirot stepped forward with rapid elegance, carefully placing one gloved hand upon the small of his back and holding his other hand slightly raised. His little grey cells were already turning over the scant facts with utmost precision. He knelt beside Lady Phillimore, leaning close to observe the wound. Under his magnifying gaze, the puncture mark measured scarcely 3/16 of an inch in diameter, its edges clean and imperceptibly bruised. "A most exquisite incision," he noted, tone even, almost reverent. "Tell me, madam, did you observe anything unusual in the night?" His question was addressed to Miss Mayhew, who swallowed hard, her bonnet bobbing slightly. "No, Monsieur Poirot," she replied. "I heard nothing more than the wind. Mr. Collins and I, well, we did not retire until late, and the house was quiet." She gestured apologetically at the library's windows. "The curtains were drawn for privacy, but I should have checked sooner." Poirot nodded, his sharp eyes roving the room. First, he noted the tea. A thin film adhered to the cup side, while the saucer bore a stray drop of spilled liquid. The teaspoon lay on the table's edge, its bowl facing upward. He catalogued these minutiae as if they were clues in an intricate tapestry. Next, he examined the pocket watch Lady Phillimore had clutched in her hand. Its silver chain was unbroken, the enamelled face pristine except for a single crack at the 12 o'clock position. The time read for 17 a.m. Poirot tapped the crystal with a gloved fingertip. The hand trembled on its pivot, then stilled. Exactment quatervingt it dic September minutes past the witching hour, he murmured. The time of death, perhaps, or a red herring chosen by a calculating mind. He straightened and surveyed the assembled household. Greer, still pale and shaking, Miss Mayhew, composed but visibly anxious, and Mr. Collins, who stood at the door, lips pressed in a thin line. "Call the other guests," Poirot directed quietly. "No one is to leave the grounds." He rose, smoothing his coat. "It is imperative that we preserve the scene and interview each soul present." Miss Mayhew nodded, dispatching Collins to carry out the order. The butler murmured assent and hurried away. Within the hour, all were assembled in the gallery, their faces ashen beneath the western light windows. Miss Eleanor Chase, stirring her tea as though it might lend comfort, asked in a trembling voice, "Is Lady Phillimore dead?" Her query was met only by tightening jaws and stony silences. Admiral Ravenshaw, his naval bearing intact but his voice subdued, said simply, "This is most distressing. I scarcely slept last night, the wind kept me awake. I heard nothing unusual." Monsieur Dupré, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. "Surely this is a terrible accident. A sudden illness perhaps, compounded by shock. The wound looks—" He halted as Poirot raised a gloved hand to still him. "Accident is not the word I would use, monsieur," Poirot replied crisply. "Observe the wound. A puncture, with no surrounding contusion. There was no struggle. One white rose upon the breast. This is the work of a deliberate hand." A murmur rippled through the company. Greer swallowed. "You are suggesting murder," he whispered. Poirot's gaze was implacable. "I have no choice but to consider all possibilities. The question now is, by whom, and why? Each of you remained in your chambers until— how many of you heard the clocks strike for this morning?" A hush followed, broken only by the rasp of radiators coming to life. Poirot paced briefly, eyes on each in turn. "I will require statements from all, signed and sworn. Mr. Collins, please fetch pen, ink, and paper." The butler nodded and departed. Poirot raised his voice to address the group. "Until the coroner arrives, this house is a temporary scene of inquiry. We must guard against the removal of evidence. No one goes outside the library or the gallery unless accompanied." He paused, then shook his head. "And the white rose, significant, non? A symbol of purity, of memory, or a sinister calling card?" He flicked his moustaches. "We shall examine our petals later." As the guests exchanged glances, each saw Poirot's intent. Their world, once an enclave of aristocratic leisure, had been transformed into a theatre of suspicion. In that still-air chamber, among dusty tomes and glinting brass, a sombre verdict prevailed. Within these walls, there lurked a murderer. And Poirot, ever the master of the careful mind, would soon unravel every alibi, every misdirection, and every dark motive that led a guest to silence Lady Phillimore forever. Chapter 3, Methodical Interviews. The morning after Lady Phillimore's death dawned with a brittle light that seeped through the stained glass transom above the gallery door. Outside, the Cornish wind still roared against the high cliffs, but within Windermere House an uneasy hush prevailed. Poirot stood by the central table, its surface cleared of tea trays and silverware, his posture immaculate, his moustaches waxed into precise crescents. Before him lay 4 folders, each bearing a guest's name in Lady Phillimore's elegant copperplate: Eleanor Chase, Sebastian Greer, Lucien Dupré, and Leonard Ravenshaw. Within each folder awaited a sheet of crisp white paper, pen, and ink. Miss Amis, Poirot began, addressing the assembled four, each seated in a high-backed leather chair. His voice was calm yet carried an unmistakable authority. I must now conduct formal interviews. It is imperative that we establish your movements and states of mind from last night until the discovery of Madame's body. He paused, allowing them a moment to steady their nerves. Thank you for your cooperation. 1. Miss Eleanor Chase, novelist. Miss Chase accepted her folder with trembling fingers, her grey-green eyes bright with apprehension. She smoothed the front of her navy dress as though reassuring herself. What was your final activity before retiring, Miss Chase? Poirot asked. She glanced at the ornate clock on the mantel, its minute hand crawling toward 10 a.m., and took a measured breath. I was in the study, Monsieur Poirot, she said, completing my chapter revisions. Lady Phillimore had offered to read them, and I wanted to make the best impression. She touched the ink stain on her sleeve, as though newly conscious of it. I retired to my room around 11:30. She hesitated. I heard a low rumble, but assumed it was the wind. I did not emerge until, her voice faltered, until the discovery. Poirot nodded, jotting notes. Did you see anyone in the corridor? He prompted. No, monsieur. The corridor was dark, and the lights had been turned off. I did not think to call out. She looked down at her folded hands. I went straight to bed. Poirot's pen moved with deliberation. Very well. Have you noticed anything unusual this morning? Anything at all? She shook her head. Only that Lady Phillimore's roses are gone from the vases in the drawing room. I noticed it on my way to breakfast. Poirot made a small stroke in his notes. Thank you, Miss Chase. Your statement is complete. 2. Mr. Sebastian Grier, poet. The poet sat with his back ramrod straight, his thin spectacles reflecting the diffuse light. He seemed more composed than the others, though silent tremors ran through his fingers as he accepted his folder. Mr. Grier, you discovered Lady Phillimore's body. Please describe your actions from 4 a.m. onward. Grier closed his eyes momentarily, then opened them with a steadier gaze. I woke, naturally, I suppose, just before dawn, thinking of a line that came to me in the night. He paused, swallowing. I took my book of sonnets to the library, hoping to read by the lamplight. That is when I encountered her. He rubbed his temple. I froze. I could not bring myself to touch anything until Mr. Collins arrived. And prior to that? Poirot pressed. Were you alone in your room? Grier nodded. Yes, I returned to my room after the discovery, but could not sleep. I wrote a few lines in my journal. Then I dressed and came here. Your journal? Poirot repeated, eyes narrowing. Is it present? Grier's hand went to his breast pocket. Here, he murmured, producing a small leather-bound volume. I have it with me. I can show you the entries, if you wish. Later, Poirot agreed. For now, your written statement, please. Grier dipped the pen, his handwriting looping elegantly. As he wrote, Poirot observed the slow steady drip of ink onto the paper, no smudges, no sign of haste. 3. Monsieur Lucien Dupré, art dealer. Monsieur Duprés's black waistcoat was buttoned with immaculate precision, his posture relaxed yet alert. He met Poirot's gaze with dark, inscrutable eyes. Monsieur Dupré, tell me your whereabouts after you retired last night. Dupré paused, his French accent coloring each word. I was in the gallery, inspecting the lady's collection. She confided in me a new acquisition before supper, a small portrait by a minor Dutch master. He pursed his lips. I wished to see it by candlelight. I left at midnight. Did you see anyone in the gallery? Poirot inquired. Only Miss Chase, emerging from the study with her manuscripts, Dupré replied. She looked hurried, as though anxious to return to something. He added, I also noticed that one of the portraits had been shifted from its usual position. The canvas was slightly askew. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Which painting? Dupré named it, a sombre landscape of wind-swept dunes, previously concealed behind a false panel. I thought it odd, but did not linger. He took up the pen. I retired to my room shortly thereafter. Poirot allowed a faint nod. And your morning? Any observations? Dupré drew a deep breath. The white roses, were missing from the drawing-room vases. It struck me as unusual, given Lady Phillimore's fondness for them. I mentioned it to the butler, but he said nothing was amiss. With that, Dupré filled in his statement, adding his signature in a bold flourish. For Admiral Sir Leonard Ravenshaw, retired. The Admiral sat erect, his gold naval watch glinting beneath his cuff. He spoke in a measured baritone, each word deliberate. Admiral, your account, please. Poirot gestured. Ravenshaw cleared his throat. I retired early, around 10 o'clock. The wind made sleeping difficult, and I preferred to read by lamplight. He tapped the cane beside him. I kept to my room. I heard no aberrant sounds until dawn, then I was roused by Mr. Greer's call. And did you observe the state of the library? The Admiral shook his head. Only upon joining you all here. I too noted the puncture wound and the rose. I presumed the latter a symbolic gesture, perhaps a hallmark of an assassin. It seems almost ceremonial. Precisely, Poirot said softly, almost to himself. Ceremonial. He rose and circled the table, his gaze moving from one guest to the next. Merci, Admiral. Your statement, please. Ravenshaw complied, his handwriting precise, the letters bold and angular. Concluding the interviews. Once each guest had completed and signed their statements, Poirot collected the folders and deposited them in his overcoat pocket. He pressed his gloved fingertips together in thoughtful repose, gazing at the 4 individuals seated before him. Miss Amis, he said, voice calm, I thank you for your candor. These statements will be most helpful. But the inquiry does not end here. He paused, allowing his words to settle in the charged silence. I shall require access to your rooms for a brief period of inspection. Strictly to gather facts, nothing more. You will not be left unattended with any other guest's belongings. A murmur of assent rippled through the group. Miss Chase frowned slightly, Dupré's forehead creased, Greer's lips pressed together, and Ravenshaw inclined his head. Poirot raised one slender finger. And one more thing, the white rose placed upon Madame's breast, Miss Amis, is a deliberate clue. The gardener cultivates both crimson and ivory varieties. I must ask you each, have you any particular fondness for white roses? They exchanged perplexed glances. Miss Chase hesitated, then shook her head. I prefer red roses, she said softly. Greer murmured, they are too pale. Dupré remained stoic. Madame had asked me to order ivory ones for the entrance hall, but I do not know why. Ravenshaw looked pensive. My wife favored them. I had a corsage of white roses when I was wed. Poirot nodded, eyes alight. Intriguing. He tapped his moustaches. I shall reflect upon these matters. Until further notice, please remain on site and cooperate with any requests. He paused at the door, turning back to them. I fear this is but the beginning, Miss Amis. The truth lies hidden like a pearl within its shell. We must pry open every corner of this house, and every mind under this roof, to reveal it. As Poirot departed, leaving the 4 in thoughtful silence, the wind outside sighed against the walls of Windermere House. Within, the gears of suspicion turned ever more swiftly, each guest's secrets inching closer to revelation beneath the detective's unrelenting gaze. The methodical interviews had laid bare fragments of truth, and fragments of falsehood, setting the stage for the next phase of his inquiry, a meticulous search of the house itself, where lurking in dark closets and shadowed alcoves were clues that would make or break the investigation. And as Poirot's little grey cells ticked onward, the morale of the assembled foe trembled on a knife edge between innocence and guilt. Chapter 4, A Web of Red Herrings. In the gathering dusk of Windermere House's fourth day, the halls felt heavier with suspicion than with their usual musty grandeur. Poirot, dressed in his charcoal frock-coat and starched collar, had spent the morning interviewing the gardener, Mr. Pritchard, and the cook, Mrs. Fairchild, neither of whom offered illuminating testimony beyond confirming that the house's ancient telephone system remained inexplicably dead since the night of the murder. The line, Pritchard observed, was cut somewhere in the cliffside conduit, leaving them marooned until the next scheduled repair, an inconvenience that served a darker purpose by isolating every suspect. By mid-afternoon, Poirot convened the four principal guests in the gallery once more. A single lamp burned on the sideboard, casting elongated shadows upon their faces. He began with a measured calm. "Miss Amis, we must confront certain anomalies, apparent clues that may mislead as much as illuminate." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "The missing stiletto." "First," Poirot announced, "the murder weapon, a dagger of elegant design, I believe." He produced a finely wrought illustration he had sketched from memory, a slender blade tapering to a hair's breadth point, a silver filigree hilt encrusted with red garnets. This stiletto belonged to Lady Phillimore's private collection, kept locked in a glass-fronted cabinet in the library. His eyes flicked to the empty space in the display where such a weapon should have rested. Yet now it is gone. He tapped the drawing. A murderer who steals the very instrument of crime, clever, but expected. I have asked Miss Mayhew to locate all keys. And yet, I think this omission may serve as a distraction. Monsieur Dupré cleared his throat. Surely the weapon's absence is self-evident, it must be hidden by the killer, so that no one can identify it, none. His accent lingered on the final syllable. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, monsieur. Yet consider, if one's intent is camouflage, why not leave the stiletto behind, cleaned of fingerprints? To remove it invites search of every nook in the house. A risk, unless the true weapon is something else entirely, and this fine stiletto serves only as misdirection. He let the notion hover in the lamplit silence. The poet's bloodless manuscript. Next Poirot held aloft a single sheet, a page from Sebastian Grier's unpublished poem, seized from his room earlier that morning. In florid script, Grier described a silver kiss that phrased the throat, beneath, pale petals strewn like betrayed vows. He sighed dramatically. The imagery is strikingly reminiscent of the crime scene. Yet the page bears no trace of real blood. Poirot drummed his fingertips. A red herring most exquisite, art imitating life, or the reverse. We must ask whether Grier penned this before the murder, or afterward, moved by guilt or a desire to implicate another. Grier's eyes darted nervously. I wrote that just after I learned of the death. A mere poetic exercise, monsieur. I meant no malice. His voice cracked, but Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. The portrait in the gallery. Poirot rose, crossing to the far wall where hung a small Dutch portrait of a storm-lashed shoreline. "Let us speak of art," he said. "Last night, Monsieur Dupré mentioned that this painting had been shifted on its hook. You attributed it to curiosity, monsieur." He addressed Dupré directly. Dupré stiffened. "Yes, I wish to examine the frames back for the painter's signature. I will own that I leaned the canvas forward, but I replaced it afterward." He gestured with a delicate hand. Nothing more. Poirot studied the frame's edge. Yet behind it, I discovered a folded scrap of Lady Phillimore's stationery, torn roughly from the corner of a letter. Its ink-stained margin spoke of urgency. He tossed the fragment onto the central table. A clue, perhaps, to her final correspondences. But no murderer would hide a message where it could be found so easily, unless they wished to deceive us. The novelist's ink-stained sleeve. Turning to Eleanor Chase, Poirot gestured to the faint bluish blotch decorating her left cuff. Regarding your ink, Miss Chase, you said it accrued while revising your manuscript. And yet, your writing desk bore only one inkpot, dried to a crust. Rather, this stain seems fresh. Pray, whose ink might it be? He paused, eyes glinting. Miss Chase's brow furrowed. I do not know, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps I knocked over the pot when startled by a draught. The windows were ajar. Her voice quavered, but Poirot's gaze remained unmoved. The Admiral's naval dagger. Finally, Poirot addressed Admiral Ravenshaw. You have a naval dagger of your own, sir, retained as a souvenir of service. Yet it disappeared from your luggage on the night in question. It reappeared this morning in the greenhouse, its blade smeared with earth but no blood. He settled the eyes of all upon the Admiral. A weapon planted to confuse us, earth to evoke a struggle among the hedges, when the crime occurred within the library. Why the greenhouse? Why soil? A diversion, I suspect. But from what? The Admiral tugged at his sleeve. I found it thus when I sought my landscaping shears. I can only surmise someone wished to implicate me in a scene of violence beyond these walls. His tone was measured, but Poirot detected a flicker of genuine indignation. A sudden squall and the telephone's final demise. As Poirot spoke, a sudden schooner register of wind rattled the window panes. Rain lashed the glass, and lightning traced white fingers across the sky. The lights flickered, then waned, succumbing to the gale's assault on the distant generator. A collective gasp rose from the guests. Inconvenient, Poirot intoned softly. The telephone, too, lies silent. Our lines of communication are severed, and we remain at Windermere House until the morrow. Yet in every inconvenience lies opportunity. He beckoned them to follow as he crossed the room toward an ebony bookshelf. On a lower shelf lay an open volume on forensic botany, pages marked and annotated in pencil. I borrowed this text from the studies table, Poirot said, directing their gaze to the annotations, detailed notes on petal residue and stem puncture patterns. Note here, he tapped a margin, the observation that a white rose's thorns are too stubby to inflict so clean a wound. Therefore, the bloom upon her chest was purely symbolic. He closed the book with a soft snap. Originally planted as evidence, ultimately, it misleads. Subtle clues, deeper confusion. Poirot paused amid the drumming rain to survey his company. So far, we have a missing stiletto, an innocuous poem suggesting guilty fantasy, a displaced portrait with a hidden scrap of letter, a novice's ink that may or may not belong to her, and a dagger smeared with nothing but dirt. All point toward different suspects, yet none conclusively. He splayed his hands. Our path is obstructed by a web of red herrings, a tangle woven by a clever hand to protect the true killer. He stepped back, inclining his head gracefully. I will retire to the library to review these artifacts more closely. I advise you all return to your rooms, reflect upon your affairs, and rest. Tomorrow, we shall continue the search of the house, closets, attics, even the hidden panel behind the gallery. His glance sharpened. For only when every corner is laid bare will the real clue emerge. As he departed, the storm's fury intensified, a crescendo of wind and rain that threatened to shake the very foundations of Windermere House. Behind him, the four guests exchanged wary glances, each wondering which misdirection had most nearly ensnared them. And in the hush that followed, Poirot's footsteps echoed like a heartbeat, a solemn reminder that behind every false lead lay the promise of revelation, and that the true murderer still lurked among them, hidden behind carefully constructed lies. Chapter 5, Secrets in the Shadows. That evening, after dinner in the candlelit dining room, Windermere House seemed to contract, its passages curling into darker, more secretive shapes. The storm had abated to a steady, mournful drizzle, but the skies remained leaden, and the air felt charged with unspoken thoughts. Poirot lingered at the table's end, sipping his port, eyes contemplative beneath those precise moustaches. Around him, the four guests, each bearing fresh tensions, exchanged sparse conversation as though reluctant to break the hush. Once the last course was cleared, Poirot rose and invited his companions to join him in the gallery for a brief further examination of the house. "Miss Amis," he said, voice soft yet firm, "there remain corners unexplored and secrets yet unveiled. Let us proceed. The greenhouse and its hidden clue." They first repaired to the greenhouse, where Admiral Ravenshaw's naval dagger had been found. The glass panes were beaded with rainshots, and the hearth's brazier glowed dimly, its embers promising warmth. Mme Mayhew stood at the door with a lantern, hesitating as the group filed past. Poirot approached the dagger's resting place, a bed of potted ferns, and knelt to inspect the soil. He ran a gloved fingertip along the blade's ricasso. "Monsieur," he addressed the Admiral, "this earth is of a particular composition, coarse peat mixed with fine sandstone grit. Tell me, where on the estate might such soil be found?" Ravenshaw surveyed the surrounding pots. "Only in the newly built rockery by the east wall," he answered. The gardener imported the mixture to simulate mountain terrain for his alpine collection. Poirot rose and gestured at the ferns. "And yet someone staged this scene to suggest a struggle here. But notice, no scuff marks on the gravelled path, no displaced pots. The dagger was carefully placed. The soil, however, retains traces of a rare moss, visible here." He pointed to 2 minute green specks on the blade's crossguard. "That grows only inside the hothouse, on the north-facing wall." He rose, looking to each guest. "Which of you visited the greenhouse after midnight?" The group exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Chase shivered slightly. "I fetched sprigs of lavender from my room," she admitted. "But I was careful not to disturb anything." Sebastian Grier's eyes widened. "I sought a cutting of fuchsia for my journal sketch at dawn, but found no flowers in bloom." Dupré and the Admiral both denied recent visits. Poirot noted their reluctance, 2 small admissions, each trivial on its own, now entwined with the dagger's false implication. The secret passage in the gallery. Next, Poirot led them back to the gallery. As lightning flickered in the western sky, he drew aside the storm-blue drapes that masked the east wall. There, concealed behind the Dutch landscape, he gently pressed at a narrow slate seam. With a soft click, a hidden panel swung inward, revealing a shallow alcove lined with dusty boards. "Insightful, yes?" Poirot murmured. "Lady Phillimore kept small treasures here, letters, sketches, secret inventories. But someone has rifled this hiding place." He shone his lantern into the recess. A torn scrap of girdle fabric lay atop a pile of dog-eared ledgers. "See here, the textile matches the inside trim of Miss Chase's dressing gown." He looked up. "Miss Chase?" Eleanor blinked, flushed. Once I sought privacy to compose a letter," she stammered. "I did not intend to steal anything." Poirot's gaze was gentle yet unyielding. "Nonetheless, you admit entering this passage after Madame's death?" She nodded, voice low. "I feared some private correspondence might implicate me. So I fled without looking." Sebastian Grier murmured, "Yet the papers are disturbed as though hastily rifled. Someone searched for a specific document." Dupré crossed his arms. "Perhaps that document concerned the art forgery Lady Phillimore discovered." Admiral Ravenshaw remained silent, but his steady eyes absorbed every detail. The library's subtle betrayal. Poirot then directed them to the library, where the murder had occurred. The mahogany desk stood undisturbed, but the tall cabinet, once home to the silver filigree stiletto, was open and empty. A single drawer protruded slightly. Poirot knelt to examine its interior and drew forth a small, leather-bound poet's journal, Grier's. He handed it to the poet, who accepted it with trembling fingers. "Why did you hide this here?" Poirot asked quietly. "Your journal contains not only your dreamlike verses, but also notes on Lady Phillimore's recent inquiries about valuable manuscripts and hidden assets." Greer swallowed. I was upset by her advice. She suggested I sell some rights to a publisher, and I feared she would exploit my work." He looked to Poirot. "So I wrote in secret." Poirot rose, holding up a folded letter found in the desk's inner compartment. The envelope bore Lady Phillimore's seal. He slit it open and read, "To Miss Mayhew, trust this in utmost secrecy. The art forgery involves persons beneath this roof." At the bottom, a single line, "White roses signify that all is ready." Poirot's eyes swept the group. She knew more than she shared, and she marked her letter with a rose code. He folded it. The white rose upon her breast was not an executioner's token, but a signal, an answer to someone who awaited confirmation. He nodded to Mayhew. "Where is this letter now?" Lydia Mayhew bowed her head. I was asked to destroy it." "I did. I burned it, at Lady Phillimore's request." Her voice trembled. "I obeyed." Poirot's expression softened. "You did well, madam. Yet its existence reveals a network of trust and betrayal." The hidden staircase. Barely pausing, Poirot led the party beneath the grand staircase. He tapped at an unremarkable panel, and, with the aid of a brass key discovered in Dupray's possession, disclosed a narrow spiral stair descending into darkness. He raised his lantern. The steps led to a dank cellar. Evidently, the house was built with clandestine entries, no doubt utilized for smuggling contraband up from the cliffs. He pointed to scratch marks in the stone. "Fresh, perhaps made last night." Dupray frowned. Lady Phillimore mentioned discovering secret shipments of art in the cellars, objects moved unlawfully. He ran a hand through his hair. "I thought she exaggerated." Poirot stepped down into the cellar, lifting the lantern. Beneath a pile of old crates lay an overturned wooden box. He crouched and examined its contents, fragments of porcelain, shards of blue-glazed tile, insignificant, perhaps, but showing recent disturbance. Our unknown guest may have entered here after the murder, to conceal an item, or to retrieve one. He peered upward. But from the house's plan, there is only one way in and out. Unspoken tensions. As they ascended, the candles flickering and the house creaking with the weight of history, Poirot paused before the group. Secrets, Miss Amis, lie not only in hidden passages but in the hearts of those who enter them. Each of you has sought privacy, and with privacy comes suspicion. He let the words linger before concluding, "Tonight, I urge you all to reflect, what truth do you guard so closely that darkness is your chosen confessor?" They departed silently, each retreating to their rooms under the watchful eyes of the house staff. Poirot lingered in the gallery a moment longer, his little grey cells racing. The greenhouse soil, the torn stationery, the rifled alcove, the poet's hidden journal, the secret stair, all threads of a tangled web. He had planted seeds of doubt among the guests, yet none had yielded the full-grown culprit. The real secret, the motive that bound these disparate clues, remained concealed behind a mask of misdirection. As the house fell into stillness, Poirot extinguished his lantern and climbed the main staircase, led by the lamp's wavering glow. Above, the corridors curled in silent darkness, each door a guarded vault. He paused outside Lady Phillimore's suite, recalling the soft click of her locket clasp as she turned the key. Something in that intimate gesture whispered of a final confidant, someone to whom she entrusted her last truth. And with that, Poirot retired for the night, determined that the next day's search would not merely uncover hidden objects, but expose the hidden heart that had brought death to Windermere House. His little grey cells would not rest until the final revelation unfurled its petals, white, red, or otherwise, revealing the one who wielded the stiletto and orchestrated every red herring to protect the darkest secret of all. Chapter 6, Gathering Clouds of Suspicion. That evening, as lantern light flickered against the polished oak of the dining room, an uneasy tension had settled over Windermere House. The day's rain had given way to a damp mist, and the grounds lay shrouded in low-hanging cloud. Inside, a long mahogany table was laid for an intimate supper, china rimmed with gold, cutlery set to precision, and centerpieces of snowy white roses, the same variety that had marked Lady Phillimore's final moments. The absence of the hostess herself was painfully apparent. Her chair remained conspicuously empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that bound the guests together. Poirot presided at the head of the table, his posture immaculate, his gaze contemplative. He wore a dark velvet smoking jacket over his ties, and in his hand a slender stem of a white rose. Around him sat the suspects, Miss Eleanor Chase opposite him, her composure wavering beneath polite restraint, Mr. Sebastian Grier, whose melancholy eyes betrayed sharp attentiveness, Monsieur Lucien Dupré, ever cool and measured, and Admiral Sir Leonard Ravenshaw, imposing yet visibly uneasy. The butler moved silently among them, refilling glasses and replacing plates with hushed efficiency. The first courses passed in near silence, consommé so clear it mirrored each wary face, followed by smoked salmon on crusty rye. Each guest took small, precise bites, as though conscious of every mouthful. Poirot observed them dispassionately, noting the slight trembling of Miss Chase's hand as she lifted her fork, the way Grier's gaze flitted to the open window, and the subtle crease at Dupray's temple whenever the conversation stalled. Ravenshaw cleared his throat once, but offered no comment. Halfway through the meal, the butler paused and bent to whisper in Poirot's ear. The detective's eyes flickered, and he nodded without speaking. At that precise moment, a soft chime echoed through the room, sharp, unexpected. All heads turned toward the tall grandfather clock that stood sentinel beside the sideboard. Its pendulum had ceased its steady swing, and its face displayed the time, 8:03 p.m. Curious, Poirot murmured, setting down his glass. The dining room clock stopped at precisely 8:03. He looked around the table. "Tell me, did any of you adjust the time this evening, or note the striking of the hour?" Miss Chase spoke first, voice low. "I did not notice. I was preoccupied." She averted her eyes. Grier, cheeks flushed, coughed softly. "I heard nothing, save the roll of thunder outside." Dupray's reply was equally measured. "The clock kept perfect time until dinner commenced. I observed the hourglass in the gallery earlier, but paid no heed to the clock itself." The Admiral frowned. "I glanced at it before sitting down. It showed about 7:55. I assumed it had lost a few minutes over the week." His tone was steady, but his fingers tapped nervously on the tablecloth. Poirot rose and crossed to the clock. With an almost imperceptible gesture, he lifted the glass dome of the face and gently stroked the brass hands. No mechanism ceased or clicked. Instead, a faint smear of oil stood out on the minute hand's pivot. He traced it with a gloved fingertip. The mechanism was deliberately jammed, he concluded. And by whom? Someone who wished the time to mark this precise moment. He turned back to the group. 8:03. Not an arbitrary hour. Something occurred, or someone planned it to seem so. Silence settled again, heavier now, as though the room itself held its breath. Poirot returned to his seat, placing the white rose stem on his plate. "Let us consider recent events. The rose at the murder scene, the telegram slips in the gallery, the garden dagger, the secret passage, and now, this stopped clock." He paused, watching their faces. Each clue corresponds to an element of the estate. But the stopped clock implies a final signal, a marker for an event to follow the killing. Dupray's dark eyes narrowed. "You imply someone here planned more than the murder? A sequence to be enacted?" He leaned forward. "Like some morbid performance." "Exactament," Poirot replied. "The murderer is methodical, precise, an artist of crime, if you will. We have already seen red herrings meant to misdirect, the stolen stiletto, the soil-smeared dagger, even the poet's bloodless verses. But none as deliberate as this. He tapped the table. The stopping of the clock is not merely symbolic. It physically halts time for Lady Phillimore's death. And by doing so, issues a challenge to those who would seek the truth, find the moment in all its exactitude. Grier shifted in his seat. You seek a motive, sir, yes? I confess my verses were not hateful, they were lamentations. But I would never, his voice trailed off as he swallowed. Poirot held his gaze, unblinking, before turning to Miss Chase. And you, mademoiselle, your affinity for the rose code, white to confirm, red to deny. Yet in the drawing room this afternoon, you insisted on crimson for your desk. Why? Miss Chase's delicate jaw tightened. I simply wish to avoid reminders, she whispered. White roses, they bring sorrow. Her eyes glistened, and she glanced away. Poirot's eyes rested briefly on her sapphire brooch, shaped like a fallen blossom. Indeed, he said softly. He rose once more, addressing the table with gentle finality. Tonight, I ask that each of you retire early. Reflect upon your last actions before and after 8:03. The truth may lie in something you dismissed as insignificant, a misplaced glove, a muffled footstep, the alteration of an appointment. He inclined his head. Tomorrow we shall resume our search, the attics, the secret stair, and every volume in the library. Nothing will remain untouched. As he spoke, the candles flickered, uneasy witnesses to the drama unfolding. Outside, the wind had calmed, but within, the currents of suspicion swirled like storms at sea. The guests rose with stiff formality, gathering their coats and departing with measured strides. Poirot remained standing, gazing after them until the servants closed the doors and the hall fell silent. Left alone, Poirot moved to the clock. He reset the hands to the correct time, 8:15 p.m., and closed the glass. Yet he knew that the moment of 8:03 would haunt more than the clock face, it would echo in minds weighed by guilt or fear. He touched the white rose stem, now wilting in the candle heat, and mused on its significance, a silent witness, like a gravestone's epitaph. With a quiet sigh, Poirot exited the dining room, lantern in hand, to ascend the grand staircase. Each step creaked underfoot, as though lamenting the passage of innocence. Above, the corridors stretched in shadowed silence, punctuated only by the locked doors of the suspect rooms. He paused outside Miss Chase's door, recalling her pained expression over the rose's color. He remembered the rasp of the clock's final chime. His little grey cells, ever active, whirred with possibilities. The murder had been committed with elegance, but elegance could be dissected, motive revealed, and method unraveled. In the hush of Windermere House, amid the gathering clouds of suspicion, Poirot felt the first stirrings of a breakthrough. For as sure as the clock could be reset, so too could the truth be restored, every secret would emerge from shadow, and by morning, the key to the mystery would lie, unmistakable, in the place no one yet dared to look. Chapter 7, The Unfinished Puzzle. Windermere House lay under a quilt of mist that night, its windows glowing dimly like lanterns on a fog-bound quay. Within the gallery, where shadows clung to the carved cornices and the silent Dutch painting loomed, the assembled company gathered at Poirot's request. The dining room clock had been repaired and now chimed in measured tones, each echo a reminder of past deceit. At Poirot's side stood the butler, Mr. Collins, ready to present the final fragments of evidence the detective believed would bring them closer to the truth. Poirot stepped forward, his gait composed, moustaches perfectly waxed into their characteristic arcs. Miss Amis, he began, we have passed through iterations of misdirection, a stolen stiletto, a soil-stained dagger, a secret panel rifled, a stopped clock, and poems evoking a crimson kiss. Each clue led us astray, like a will-o'-the-wisp across the marshes. Yet within these diversions lies the kernel of truth. He paused to let the words sink in, then indicated the wide table behind him, upon which lay several items, the torn scrap from the secret passage, a fragment of white rose petal preserved in sealing wax, Miss Chase's ink-stained cuff, and Admiral Ravenshaw's naval watch, set permanently to 4:17 a.m. First, Poirot said, lifting the scrap of stationery, this fragment bore Lady Phillimore's monogram, E.P. It was torn from a private letter, one that named the true purpose of the winter residency, not literary creation, but the clandestine appraisal of recently uncovered drawings by a minor old master. Lady Phillimore suspected a forgery ring operating under the guise of our residency. He placed the scrap aside and tapped the watch. This watch shows the moment she died, for 17. Remarkably, its mechanism was halted by the same delicate oil smudge found on the dining room clock. Such precision implies a hand accustomed to fine instruments, someone with knowledge of horology or patience for detail. He lifted the rose petal next. White roses, symbol of trust and purity. Madame used them as a code, white to affirm secrecy, red to denote danger. The bloom upon her breast was not an artistic flourish, as we supposed, but a confirmation that her letter had been sent and received. Yet no red rose appeared anywhere, indicating that she believed her confidants trustworthy, thus her final choice of white. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Miss Eleanor Chase, you admitted rifling the secret passage to protect your reputation, yet you found no letter. Your ink stain demonstrates you handled not only your own manuscript but Lady Phillimore's stationery. You prized your burgeoning career, and she threatened to expose you for collusion in the sale of forged proofs. Miss Chase's face paled, her hands trembling around her notepaper. Mr. Sebastian Grier, Poirot continued, turning to the poet, your journal, discovered hidden in the library, not only recorded your poetic lamentations but contained calculations of auction values and notes on the old master drawings. You feared your slush fund would be revealed. Grier's shoulders sagged, and he averted his eyes. Poirot lifted the tiny dagger's illustration. Monsieur Dupré, your expertise in art and your financial stake in these drawings is clear. You alone possessed both the means to procure rare manuscripts and the motive to eliminate Madame when she threatened exposure. Dupré's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. Admiral Ravenshaw, Poirot said, gently touching the dagger's soil sample, you cultivated the rockery's unique soil mixture and stored naval instruments here for pride's sake. That dagger's reappearance in the greenhouse with no blood but fresh soil indicates a planting meant to implicate you. Yet only you could blend soil from the rockery so precisely. He paused, allowing the gravity of these revelations to press upon the group. We are thus left with three suspects of equal standing, Miss Chase, Mr. Grier, and Monsieur Dupré, each complicit in the forgery scheme, each possessing motive and opportunity. And yet the true murderer orchestrated red herring so adroitly that all roads seemed to lead to different culprits. Poirot turned to the door, where Miss Mayhew stood with a slender violin case. And finally, he said, a last clue. He opened the case to reveal a single white rose, its petals pressed and dried. This was found concealed in Lady Phillimore's desk, under a false bottom. It bore no scent, for it had been harvested weeks ago, a keepsake from her engagement to Admiral Ravenshaw. Yet most would overlook such a token. Only someone aware of that intimacy would know its provenance. Only someone who desired to appropriate the code would place it there. He closed the violin case and faced them once more. Miss Amis, the puzzle remains unfinished. I have presented the fragments as they lie, but their assembly into a coherent whole eludes even my little grey cells. Tomorrow, at sunrise, we shall reveal the solution. I shall summon you to the gallery again. We will retrace every step, revisit every room, and follow the path of the true murderer, who not only concealed a crime but crafted illusions to mislead us all. With that, Poirot inclined his head, signaling the end of the session. The guests dispersed, their minds a tangle of suspicion and self-doubt. In the silent aftermath, only Poirot lingered, his sharp eyes fixed upon the pressed rose, the dagger's sketch, the torn letter, all tokens of motives and misdeeds. That night, as the house settled into its own uneasy pace, the detective retired to his quarters. Candlelight played over stacks of notes and sketches arranged upon his writing desk. He placed each clue before him, ephemeral rose petals, splatters of soil, fragments of paper, and allowed his little grey cells to dance among them. Outside, the Atlantic's distant murmurs lulled the house to sleep. Within, he pondered the final threads that connected motive, opportunity, and method. He recalled Lady Philimore's last words to him, spoken with quiet urgency: "Trust no one fully, Monsieur Poirot, for even the closest companion may harbour a blade." Those words, uttered in life, now guided him toward revelation. And as he extinguished the candle at the stroke of midnight, he felt the electric thrill of an impending solution. The storm of intrigue had drawn its final currents, and tomorrow's light would reveal the murderer in their full guise, no longer hidden behind misdirection, but exposed by the very clues they believed would shield them. Thus, in the hush before dawn, the stage was set for Poirot's grand denouement. The guests would gather again, and the intricate tapestry of deceit would be laid bare, each thread leading inexorably to the truth that lay, as ever, in the detective's unerring brain. Chapter 8: Poirot's Grand Devoilement. The first light of dawn found Windermere House cloaked in mist, its turrets and chimneys dissolving into silvery haze. In the gallery, where the great Dutch landscape presided over silent spectators, Hercule Poirot had summoned the remaining 4 guests, and the faithful Mr. Collins, to witness the denouement. The repair telephone hummed faintly in the corner, prepared at last to call the mainland. Yet all attention was fixed on Poirot himself, whose precise figure stood before the fireplace, moustaches waxed to their finest arcs. "Miss Amis," he began, voice calm yet resonant, "we have pursued a labyrinth of false trails, a stolen stiletto, a soil-smeared dagger, a secret panel rifled, and a stopped clock. We have sifted through poems, pressed petals, and torn stationery. All were intended to scatter suspicion like leaves in the wind. But today, at last, the truth emerges from shadow." He paused to let the weight of those words settle. 1. The true motive. Lady Phillimore did not merely host a literary retreat, Poirot continued, but, unbeknownst to most, organized a discreet appraisal of recently surfaced old master drawings. She suspected some were forgeries and confided her fears in Miss Mayhew, commissioning her to destroy incriminating correspondence once the recipients had acknowledged receipt. He turned to Miss Mayhew. "You obeyed, madam?" She bowed. "Madam trusted you implicitly." Poirot nodded, then addressed the others. "Our murderer was not driven by passion alone, but by profit, by the fear that those forgeries, once exposed, would ruin both reputation and fortune." 2. The stiletto and the secret passage. Consider the stiletto, taken from Madame's locked cabinet to prompt a thorough search, yet never used. Its removal ensured everyone would inspect every corner. Meanwhile, the secret passage behind the gallery concealed not only private papers but this weapon of diversion. Poirot indicated Miss Chase. "Mademoiselle, you admitted entering the passage after the death, ostensibly to protect your reputation." Eleanor's lips tightened. "You saw Lady Phillimore's letter, you handled it, stained your ink cuff in her stationery, and then tore and discarded that scrap. You hoped we would find it and assume another culprit." 3. The greenhouse dagger. Poirot turned to Admiral Ravenshaw. "Your naval dagger was planted in the greenhouse, its blade smeared with rockery soil to implicate you in a struggle outside the library. Yet the soil contained rare hothouse moss known to thrive only on the north-facing wall, where only Miss Chase had retrieved lavender sprigs at dawn." Eleanor's cheeks paled further, but she remained silent. 4. The stopped clock and the code of roses. Then the clocks, library, gallery, and dining room, were all halted at specific times by a delicate smear of clock oil upon their wheels. The murderer, familiar with fine instruments, chose these moments to dramatize control over time itself. Poirot held aloft a single white rose petal dried in sealing wax. White roses, you recall, were Lady Phillimore's code for trust and completion. She placed one on her breast to signify that her secret letter had been dispatched. The absence of any red rose, which denoted danger, showed that she believed her confidants honest. He paused, letting the assembled guests reflect upon the roses at the table, fresh white blossoms still fragrant in crystal vases. "But you, mademoiselle," he said, addressing Eleanor Chase, "knew the code, and you appropriated a rose from her engagement bouquet, hidden in your writing desk, to confirm your own complicity." 5. The final clue, the sapphire brooch. Poirot stepped forward and extracted from his pocket a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a sapphire brooch shaped like a fallen rose. This brooch was gifted to Lady Phillimore by her late husband, an heirloom she entrusted to her closest friend. Yet it disappeared on the night of her death. "Miss Chase, you wore it at dinner." A collective intake of breath swept the room. Eleanor's eyes glistened as she pressed a hand to her throat. "To divert suspicion, you planted that brooch upon your own dress, then discovered it missing from Madame's person the next morning." 6. The confrontation and confession. Poirot folded his hands. "Thus, once you ensured all clues would point to others, Monsieur Dupré for art forgery, Mr. Grier for poetic obsession, Admiral Ravenshaw for misplaced dagger, only you remained above reproach. Yet your own meticulous orchestration proved your undoing." He met Miss Chase's eyes. "Why, mademoiselle? Why betray your host, and her hospitality?" Eleanor's composure crumbled. Tears glistened as she rose, voice trembling. She was going to expose us who financed the publications and backed the forgeries. I had invested everything in this scheme. My novels, the proceeds, it was my dream, my livelihood. When she threatened to destroy it all, I panicked. I killed her, Monsieur Poirot." Her voice broke. "I did not mean to, it was instantaneous. I took the rose from her desk, believing she would be honored by my gesture. I moved the knife and dagger, stopped the clocks. I thought I could control it." A hush fell. Sebastien Grier and Lucien Dupré exchanged somber glances. Admiral Ravenshaw looked away, hand upon his cane. Only Poirot remained impassive, his little grey cells having untangled the final threads. 7. Justice and closure. At that moment the telephone crackled to life. Mr. Collins answered and stepped aside. The local constable had arrived to relieve them of their grim vigil. As the house staff escorted Eleanor Chase in handcuffs, Poirot helped Miss Mayhew gather the shattered remnants of Lady Phillimore's correspondence. In the waning morning light, Poirot paused at the gallery windows overlooking the cliffs. The sea lay calm, as though mourning the storm past. Admiral Ravenshaw approached and offered his arm. "You have my gratitude, Monsieur Poirot," he said softly. "I never doubted your methods." Poirot inclined his head. "The little grey cells see all, mon ami. Yet even I must admit, this was among my most intricate puzzles." He smiled faintly. May Windermere House find peace once more. Epilogue. Weeks later, the estate was quiet again. The forgeries were seized, and an exhibition of genuine old master drawings was arranged, this time under proper scholarly supervision. Mr. Grier dedicated a volume of poems to Lady Phillimore's memory, while Monsieur Dupré returned to Paris, chastened but unbowed. Admiral Ravenshaw resumed his peaceful walks along the cliffs, White Rose in boutonniere in remembrance. And Miss Chase, once a promising novelist, faced trial, her manuscripts left in tatters. As for Poirot, he departed by hansom, bound for his next adventure. With his small bag in hand and a perfectly cooked omelette for breakfast behind him, he mused, a mind may be subtle, but the truth, like the tide, will always come in, no matter how cleverly one seeks to dam its course. And so, with a final touch to his moustaches, he set off, ready once more to illuminate the darkest corners of human intrigue.